Welcome to the Knowledge Project. I'm your host, Shane Parrish. I'm the author of the Farnham Street blog, a website with over 70,000 readers that's dedicated to helping us learn by mastering the best of what other people have already figured out. In the Knowledge Project, I interview amazing people from around the world so that we can all learn from them, expand our minds, and challenge our thinking. On this episode, I have Chris Dixon. Chris is a partner at perhaps the most famous venture capital firm in the world, Andreessen Horowitz, or commonly known as A16Z. We talk about the history of venture capital, why companies fail, the future of artificial intelligence, and the idea maze. I hope you like this interview as much as I did. I'd love to hear your feedback. I'm at Farnham Street on Twitter. That's at FARNAMSTREET on Twitter. Chris, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
I'm wondering, what's a typical day look like for you?
For VC? It's a good question. It's an interesting job. I guess I would divide my calendar somewhat between, two broad categories of things. One would be meeting with entrepreneurs who are starting companies and raising money and coming to us to talk about potentially investing. And then the other half of the time, working with existing investments to try to help them, with everything from maybe they're raising more money or they're trying to recruit somebody or close a sale or some other kind of thing like that. So roughly, I would say kind of half and half, kind of looking for new things. And what that means is basically a lot of meetings. So it's a big change for some people. Like I had a background in computer programming. There's a great Paul Graham blog post. It's called like Maker Schedule and Manager Schedule, I think, where he contrasts kind of the schedule of somebody who builds things. So like a computer programmer or a carpenter or what have you, versus sort of a manager. And VC is very much manager. So it's sort of 1 hour scheduled meetings, as opposed to kind of, 8 hours of getting into a flow state and thinking about a topic. So the bad part is it's sort of a lot of state switching and kind of jumping around. The good thing is it's a fascinating job. You get to meet with incredibly smart and passionate people who are doing interesting things, and they tell you all about what they're doing. So if you're kind of like intellectually curious, it's a pretty amazing job because it's sort of, 1 minute someone's telling you about some breakthrough in biotech, and the next minute you're talking about data center infrastructure, and the next minute you're talking about computer security, the next minute you're talking about, I don't know what, the transportation industry, you name it. So it's a fun job.
Sounds amazing. Can we just back up for 1 second, just so I don't make any assumptions here? So you work for like a venture capital firm, A16Z.
Uh-huh.
I'm an outsider. Can you explain,
Sure.
What does that mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I work for Andreessen Horowitz, which is the shorthand is A16Z. It was a firm founded in 2009 by Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz. Mark and Ben both, prior to that Mark had co-founded Netscape, which, was the first kind of commercial popular internet browser. And then they went on to do a bunch of other interesting startups. And maybe if you want, I can kind of back up and tell you what venture capital is more generally and a little about the history of it. Would that be helpful?
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Great. So basically venture capital, as an industry started in the 40s and 50s or something. The kind of the practice goes back further. If you go back and look at kind of wealthy, entrepreneurs, even in the, 200 years ago, a lot of them after they made money would then invest in new, and other entrepreneurs who maybe had a good idea and some good new technology, but not enough money to run it. So actually, I read a great book recently about it was How the World Was Won. It was about the laying of the first transatlantic cables in the 1840s, which they actually laid the cables onto the ground. And, if you read about all those things, they were always funded by, in some cases governments, but a lot of times some crazy, entrepreneur who'd made money and then was investing in some other new thing, right? So there was always this practice going way back. But then what happened is in really in the 1960s, it became kind of formalized as an industry called venture capital. And there were firms kind of around, it all happened in Silicon Valley around, the rise of firms like Intel,
right,
Apple, those kinds of things, Microsoft. And there were firms like Sequoia and Kleiner Perkins and other firms that basically started off as people investing their own money in new technology companies. And then at some point kind of became formalized and became the way it works today, which is today we don't really invest our own money. We invest other people's money. Specifically, we invest, a lot of our money comes from places like universities.
But you're not investing your own money?
No. So most VCs, we do invest our own money so the way it works is we have a fund and we raise money for a fund. Some of that money does actually come from us personally.
Okay.
But a lot of it doesn't. A lot of it comes from, like, for example, large universities. A lot of this is pioneered by places like Yale, for example, very famously. Started doing this in the 60s, where basically they have their endowment. You might read about it. Yale has some large endowment, and they basically, they put some portion of that in bonds and some portion in stocks, and they want to put some portion into, other asset classes, as they call them, that have long-term horizons. So basically, what's nice about those pools of capital is that they kind of plan things out in a 10-year, even 30-year horizon, which matches kind of our time horizon. So basically, that's what this industry is. It's actually, it gets a lot of attention in the press, venture capital, but it's actually a very small industry. So, there are a few dozen kind of firms that most people, that constitute the majority of the industry. Maybe a few thousand people work in the industry, right, at the most. The amount of money invested is on the order of like 10 to 20 billion per year, which sounds like a lot, but it's actually smaller than the R&D budget for a lot of for Apple and Google, for example. So so as much as it gets a lot of press, it's actually what most people would consider kind of a cottage industry.
The tech world, it seems pretty clubby from the outside. To what extent is that true?
Yeah, I guess it depends who you ask. The cynics would say it is clubby and kind of insider-ish or something. I think I would argue my feeling is it's actually it's small and people know each other, but right, there's an ethos of kind of inclusion. Anyone who's worked in the tech industry for more than a few years has seen people rise incredibly quickly. So I knew take people like Mark Zuckerberg or right, all these kinds of entrepreneurs like this. Like anyone who's worked in the industry for 10 years has met people like that who are now incredibly prominent back when they weren't, and is very used to kind of new, very successful people coming out of nowhere. And as a result, the industry is I think it's very sort of inclusive, and people just sort of expect, new things to pop up, and people are very responsive, I think, to, new people kind of coming. It's everyone there in Silicon Valley. And by the way, Silicon Valley, people say Silicon Valley, but I think it's also that kind of spirit is now happening in places like New York and LA and right, Canada, in Europe and Asia.
Do you think that's a byproduct, or do you think that's something conscious? Like people are trying to develop the same culture, or do you think it's just happening naturally?
Why is that? Why is it spreading?
Yeah.
I think part of it is people see the success of Silicon Valley and want to emulate it. I think part of it is, I see a lot of people who move to California to join the tech industry and then decide it's too much of an industry town, and then they want to move to New York, for example, right, to have more diversity. And to have what's great about places like New York and LA, as an example, I spent time in both places. Is you're surrounded with people that are in the arts and media and all sorts of other kinds of industries, and that kind of creates a different creative dynamic. And so I think it's just the natural kind of maturation of an industry, and as it spreads out, you have it kind of propagating to more places. China, there's other specific things, like China is its own story probably, where they're really, it's a country that sort of decided that tech is strategic and has invested heavily in it. So it's a multifaceted kind of story there, I think.
So the firm that you're a partner at, A16Z, has a stellar reputation. How did that come about? What do you guys do differently?
Yeah, well, so the kind of philosophy of the firm is a little different than the traditional philosophy in the industry. So traditionally, in the industry, there were very few venture capitalists, and so what happened was, if you were an entrepreneur, you had to go and you had to basically go to one of these 10 or so firms and pitch them your idea. And, I think these firms, they kind of thought of themselves like a little bit of the way that maybe a hedge fund thinks of itself, as their job is to come up with theories about where the future's going. And, pick the best entrepreneurs, and then once they invest, they kind of hang back and kind of monitor their investment in the same way that a hedge fund or someone might. With our firm, we think we've kind of flipped the model where we think of ourselves primarily as a service firm. So we think of ourselves the way maybe a law firm or a talent agency or someone would, where our first job is to provide services for the entrepreneur. And so and our secondary job is to sort of pick the right companies. So the services we provide for entrepreneurs, we're staffed very differently and structured very differently than most VC firms. We have over 100 employees who are not investors at our firm, whose sole job it is to help companies do things like recruit employees, build their customers base.
So now that people are seeing success with that, are your competitors copying that model, or?
I think to some extent. It's a very different financial structure. So it's hard to copy because the traditional structure is basically that VC funds charge fees, and then most of those fees go to the partner salaries. We don't. Instead, we put our fees towards these operating teams. So for our competitors to copy us, they'd have to kind of dramatically change their own compensation and pay structure,
which isn't likely, right?
Well, I mean, I think what it ends up. I mean, I think we are seeing I think you will see more and more of our kind of style. I think it'll probably come from newer firms. I mean, my broader view would be, I think it would be great if more firms did what we did. I mean, yes, it would be competition on the one hand. On the other hand, I think it would be good for entrepreneurs and good for
better for the system in a way.
Yeah, I think it's better for the system just to have it's just more alignment between the investors and the entrepreneurs, and it's investors acting themselves more like entrepreneurs who are taking risk.
Right.
And our sort of compensation is aligned with the entrepreneurs. Like we basically, most of the money, if we make money on this, will be because our company is successful, not because we collect fees.
Right.
So yeah, and so we've worked very hard to help entrepreneurs, which we think is primarily where hopefully our positive reputation comes from.
It seems like from an outsider's perspective that companies are staying private longer in the funding cycle than they ever have before, and the valuations for some of these companies, I mean, before the rumored valuations before they become public, like Uber at 50 billion or something. What do you see as the implications and second order effects of this? This seems like an unprecedented kind of scale.
It's a great question. So, I mean, part of the answer is, why are they doing it? Because they're able to do it. Because basically, what you're basically seeing is that if you read the press, they kind of confuse this issue a lot. They say that VCs are investing in companies like Uber at later stages. Actually, I mean, we don't do those kinds of investments for the most part. It's actually what is happening is firms that historically had been public investors. So, for example, Fidelity, T. Rowe Price, like a whole Wellington, all of these kind of well-known public market investors have now moved to invest in private companies. And so they're sort of the firms that are leading a lot of these late-stage investments. And basically, for a variety of reasons, I mean, so it's a complicated story. One reason that companies are staying private longer is the perception among the technology community that the public markets are somewhat short-term focused. So, if you just go read whatever the Barron's or the Wall Street Journal and things, there's an extreme focus on kind of what happens next quarter. Do they make their numbers that quarter, as opposed to, are they investing for the next 5 to 10 years?
I just push back a little on that. Like,
Sure.
Aren't Fidelity and like the T. Rowe Prices of the world, who control hundreds of millions, billions of dollars in shares in a company, aren't they the ones that could be setting that in the public market to drive the expectations to be longer term?
That's a good point, and I think that would be a good counter argument. And this is and I'm not saying this is a subtle question. I think this is it's sort of two sides of the debate. So one side of the debate would say that public market investors are short-sighted. The other side would say what you said exactly, which is there are these very long-term investors, and to your point, look at Amazon as an example where
right.
It seems as though the investors have accepted the idea that they'll be investing for the long term and forego profits for a very long time. So, but there is, on the flip side, Facebook and Google, most prominently, they have dual class stock, which means that they basically, before they went public, the founders, structured it so that they could never get fired by Wall Street.
Right. What do you think of that?
I think it's great. I'm a proponent of that. If you just look at what's happening, I just don't think you can plan technology investment on anything shorter, like just the way technology products life cycles work. I think it works on a minimum of, let's say, a 3 to 5 year cycle.
Okay.
And I just think it's very, very hard to have that kind of managed by a committee. So I'm not saying that those founders, it's less that they have sort of superpowers and more just simply that you really need sort of a small group of people or one person who's managing for a very long-term horizon.
Okay.
And it seems to be, I mean, if you just look at, I don't know, I just look at what Facebook and Google are doing right now. I mean, I also have specific experience with some of these companies where it's just, I don't want to name the specific companies, but
yeah, of course.
But some of these public companies, where I think the CEOs felt like they were, completely handcuffed or something, just simply couldn't make the kinds of investments they want to make.
Right.
So I don't know. I generally think things need to be in technology. Things need to be planned on a longer term horizon. There are a variety of different ways you could accomplish that. One of them is dual class stock. I mean, there are other proposals out there, for example, to increase, short-term capital gains to disincentivize short-term trading. I think that's another good idea. There's a variety of kind of proposals out there. I do think, though, that in general, that, long-term planning, long-term thinking is very good for us as a industry, country, world.
Yeah, I'm a proponent of long-term thinking.
And I think dual class stock is one mechanism to get there. I don't know if it's the best mechanism, but I think it's one of them.
So I have a question, but maybe you can explain funding right before that. But my question is to what extent is the first round of funding really about preserving optionality for the future so you can double and triple down on success? Or is it more about funding the idea fully? Or maybe you can walk me through some of the thinking.
You say from the investor, from the venture capitalist perspective?
From your perspective, yeah. I mean, I don't even have what are the stages and why would you invest at a particular stage and what are you looking for?
Sure.
Just briefly, yeah.
Yeah, so basically there just some quick nomenclature. There's just generally what's called seed investing, which is, one or two entrepreneurs, maybe a couple and an idea. And that's also called angel investing sometimes. And usually it's people writing, individuals writing checks or small firms, and maybe they'll raise something like $1 million or $2 million. And that kind of gives them enough money to build a small software team that can build a first product. Okay. And that's something I used to do, at A16Z. We don't do much of that anymore. We do some of that, but not as much because we have a bigger fund, and we tend to focus on what's called Series A and Series B. And so Series A is after a company has built like an initial version of a product and is now ready to, build out the product more and start selling it or taking it to market. Series B is usually a little later when they've, got some initial results and now are trying to accelerate those results. And those will typically be in Series A, let's say, $10 million might be an average investment size, and Series B, $20 million or something like this. And
your Series A deal usually includes the first right of refusal, I would guess, on further funding, or? It
usually lets us have what we call pro rata rights, which means we're allowed to invest a certain portion in the next round of funding. And mathematically, it's enough that we can preserve our kind of ownership percentage. So
preserve your equity.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically it's it just lets us kind of keep investing some, not the whole round. It's kind of technical, but basically the idea is just that we have the right to kind of keep investing some amount. Yeah. So that's usually, the industry's changed a lot. Like in the past, maybe 10 to plus years ago, VCs would actually take control of a company and in many different respects, including the board of directors. That
like
happens
a hands-on kind of.
Yeah, and it actually could there's all these horror stories of them firing the founders and things.
Oh wow.
That's not something that we do. We really just don't even take control for the most part. Most of it do now. We couldn't fire the founders if we wanted to. Not that we do want to, but we couldn't.
And if you get a reputation for that, you'd probably stop seeing deals, right?
You'd have a very short career, basically. So Not that we want to, but even if we did, it's just not the norm to have those kinds of provisions. So basically, for the most part, it's a very simple transaction. It's actually in all the areas of finance, it's probably the simplest, which is we give somebody, let's say $10 million, and in exchange, let's say we buy 15 to 20% of the company, which means if the company sells for, whatever, N million dollars, we get 15 to 20% of that.
Right.
It's for the most part, that's kind of what it is. There's a little bit more structure. There's things called preferences, which basically means that we get paid disproportionately more on certain downside cases and things like this. But it's relatively simple.
To what extent in this, you say you do more Series A than angel investing, and if I understood what you were saying correctly, you're more investing on people in the angel stage. I mean, to what extent in the Series A are you investing in people versus investing in the idea?
Great question. I think it's Series A. It's certainly people is 90% of it, and the idea is also important. With the proviso that the idea will, at that point, we know it will change. So it's kind of more like you're investing in the general direction of the idea.
Okay.
Because just the world changes. I'll just give you some, I remember when Dropbox, I'll just to take an example, raised their Series A. I think it was like 2008. And at the time, it was really pre-mobile. I mean, the iPhone had come out, but it was much less widespread than it is today.
Right.
And so, if you look back at the original pitch deck for that company, or let's say for Facebook for that matter, or LinkedIn, or all these companies today, Pinterest, none of them really had mobile as a big part of their business plan, because mobile just wasn't, that it was still feature phones, right? It was still like those little Motorola phones where you type you have the little keyboards and stuff. And so the computing world dramatically changed in the last 7 years. And so all of those companies, so if you invested in those companies early on, like a Facebook, you knew you were investing in a social network. You didn't know you were investing in a mobile apps company that eventually would buy a Messenger and buy Instagram and all these other things, right? So I would say you kind of directionally, you're investing in an idea and you're investing in people, but you also know the world will change dramatically in unexpected ways. And so, what you really are kind of looking for, it's kind of like, these kind of black swan anti-fragile ideas of you're really looking for kind of what some people call optionality, meaning like things which you can't predict the future, but you can see that there are certain scenarios where these
you're
people
disproportionately rewarded.
Exactly. I mean, so like that's the thing you have to understand. It's hard to understand about the model of VC. It's very hard to internalize, I should say, which is that the best VC funds lose money at least half the time, which means if we're doing a good job, half of our investments will fail. Right. And then some small portion will be huge hits, and some other portion will be modest hits or something.
I wonder if most people even get that in the stock market.
Yeah, no, it's very skewed in that way.
Right.
And in fact, it's interesting. I wrote a blog post about it. If anyone's interested, it's on my website, cdixon.org, called the Babe Ruth effect. And it actually, we have data.
I remember reading that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of data in the VC industry that actually, interestingly enough, the best firms actually have a higher loss rate, meaning they lose money more frequently than the less.
But when they win, the magnitude is so much greater.
Exactly.
More than
so it's like, I'm not a big sports guy, but in baseball, it's what you call slugging percentage, which is sort of home runs you hit, even if you have more strikeouts. Okay. The two tend to be correlated. So it's sort of an unnatural way to think in some ways, because when you meet entrepreneurs, you're sort of thinking somewhat like, will they succeed? But you're also thinking probably more about, if they succeed, how big could it get? Right. And so you have to kind of train yourself to think that way, and frankly, train yourself to be accepting that a lot of what you do will fail. And it's a little bit. It's one thing to realize that in the abstract, and to write a blog post about it like I did. It's very different to actually experience it, because these entrepreneurs are your friends, and and you're rooting for them, and and the reality of this job is you spend a lot of time kind of helping people in tough situations.
So if you had to group the failures into kind of three buckets between leadership, execution, and idea, what percentiles would you kind of put on those?
I think that's a good question. I guess it depends on the stage. It's very different at different stages, but there's some reasonable percentage of the time where the entrepreneur kind of does everything right, and just the market, whatever, it gets bundled into, Google releases the same product and gives it away for free or something, right? whatever it might be that just sort of like things happen that are beyond your control that just make it, or regulators just decide it's, you create a new kind of drug and the FDA decides it's, not to approve it or something, like there's certain things that are just external factors, and that's probably some, it's like, I don't know, I'm just making up a number, 25% of the time there's some external factor that is completely beyond your control. And then I think some portion of the time you're just the sort of the hypothesis is wrong about the product and the market, and that's a pretty high percentage of the time. I think then the question becomes, I think with really good entrepreneurs, they're able to kind of adapt then, and as some people call it, a pivot or something where you change what you're doing. And so that's always an interesting kind of scenario. But I would say my overall learning, having done this for, I don't know, 8 or 9 years now, I've only been a VC for 2.5 years, but I was investing personally before that for 6.5 years.
Successfully too, I might add.
Yeah, it was pretty good. I would say my biggest learning is it's probably more people than I ever, I probably thought originally it was 70% people, and now I think it's 98% people or something like that. Like, it's a lot of people.
That kind of begs the question, like, what's the difference then between a bad founder and a good founder, so to speak? Not to categorize them, but
yeah, I think a lot of it is not necessarily that they're good or bad, but it's what we have a concept we call founder market fit. So the kind of fit between the founder and the market, meaning, kind of, are they uniquely suited to do something in that market? And so a lot of times in our business, that means they have a strong technical background. So maybe, they have a PhD from Stanford and MIT in computer science. Right. And that's probably, frankly, a third, if not half of our investments are like that, are people just with very, very strong technical backgrounds who, I worked in a lab. It's very typical stories. I was at Berkeley and I worked in their big data lab, and I invented this new, open source data analysis tool. And now I want to go make a business out of it. And that's literally a company we funded called Databricks, which is a technology called Spark. That's probably a third to half of our company. So someone with very, very deep expertise, and then they have to learn, they're obviously, their background is in, let's say, computer science, or some other technical field. They have to then go learn kind of how to run a business and how to hire people and how to, get customers. But, we kind of make the assumption that that's easier to learn than the opposite. Like, it's easier to teach a computer scientist business and vice versa. You're never going to teach a business person computer science on the job, right? You have to go to school for that generally, or have some kind of long work experience. So a lot of it is that. It's like technical expertise. Sometimes it's domain expertise. So, a person comes out of, the media industry or the fashion industry, or you name it, right? Whatever industry it might be, and says, I've been working in this industry and I realized, it's done, and there's a whole bunch of things that are done in backwards ways, and I have ideas on how to improve them. And, and it comes from years of experience and deep expertise in that field. That's another common one. Another one will be kind of like, maybe like Airbnb, where it's just, for whatever reason, it seems like those founders, kind of were part of a certain cultural movement that was, around, just sort of, maybe it was a generational thing, or I don't know what it was, but people, they had been sort of sleeping on friends' couches and things,
right? Yeah,
seeing that behavior emerge, and sort of, built out, kind of rode that kind of, I don't know, that cultural wave. So that's typically a very important, this sort of founder market fit. I think also a lot of it is just, tenacity. Almost all companies that we're involved with run into extreme adversity. I've almost never been involved with a company that didn't have moments of, almost failure. And so it's how resilient are the entrepreneurs, and
how do you go about determining that? Like, how do you go about testing their grit, their tenacity, or not testing?
It's a good question. It's a good question. It's very hard to do. We do spend a lot of time with the entrepreneurs and try to get to know them. I think a lot of it will come in through their personal backgrounds. It's one reason why you'll see a lot of VCs will invest, in repeat entrepreneurs, as an example.
Right.
So, like, if you look at Travis, who founded Uber, he had been involved in, I think he started 2 companies before, and, had a long track record, and people, and he had varied levels of success, but people who knew him spoke very highly of him as a tenacious and resourceful founder. There's lots of examples of that, of sort of people with some kind of track record. If they don't have a track record, it's hard, and it's something you really don't know until the moment the adversity comes.
What are the obvious things you're trying to avoid in founders?
Well, I think at the moment, startups are having a moment of kind of pop culture trendiness or something. There's a lot of news articles about startups and venture capitalists.
It's become very sexy, right?
Yeah, and the social networking movie thing. So I think what we're having now is a bunch of people entering the industry who maybe are, coming for the wrong reasons, who come to, try to make sort of quick money or something and don't. And it's just really just not.
They don't appreciate how hard it is. And how do you pick somebody like that out? Like when they come and they present to you, how do you determine that, I think they're in it for the money versus I think they're in it because they're passionate about the idea or some other, narrative that we want to wrap around that?
Yeah, a lot of it's just depth of experience. How long have they been working on the problem? I'll just give you an example. Like I was an early investor in Kickstarter, and and they didn't have Perry and Yancey and the founders of Kickstarter. They didn't have kind of the classic computer science background I described.
Right.
They had basically been working on the idea for I'd say 7 years at the time.
Oh wow.
And had tried everything to kind of get funded, and you talk to them and it was really motivated. The original idea for Kickstarter, Perry was he was living in New Orleans and he was involved in the kind of music and art scene and had wanted to actually a service like Kickstarter for himself because I think he had tried to organize a thing where like a band that he wanted to come play would come play, and he had a bunch of fans who wanted to see them, and he just didn't have a way to kind of coordinate the two things, to have the fans put up the money. He didn't have Kickstarter, right?
Right.
And he kept thinking about that, and he kept thinking about the kind of going back in the history of the arts and the patronage model, the going back to the Renaissance Italy and things, and how the internet could kind of let you reimagine that model. And when you talk to him, so I think I invested, I don't know when it was, like 2008 or 9, when he was first starting. It was clear this was a person who was, this was his kind of white whale he'd been pursuing for forever,
a long time. Yeah.
And you could tell, just you ask him questions, and this was the depth of thinking. He had thought of everything. He had gone through. We have this concept we call the idea maze, and the idea maze is sort of the idea that startup ideas aren't really just kind of a static thing. It's kind of like you see the TV or the movies, and they have the way they kind of have these. Someone has this epiphany, and I imagine that it'll be like a intermittent windshield wiper or something. Right. In reality, it's much more of kind of a maze, meaning like. You sort of imagine how the product might work, but then you imagine if the world responds in a certain way or the technology changes in a certain way, here's how I'll adapt. And you sort of imagine yourself traversing through a maze, and at various points in the maze, there might be a dead end, or there might be a trap, or there might be a prize, or something like this. And you don't really know how the maze is going to turn out when you first start, but really obsessed founders will have thought through all the possibilities. And so a lot of what I like to do, at least when I meet with entrepreneurs, is kind of try to traverse that maze with them and understand the depth of thinking that they have, kind of gone through to get there. And so in a case like Kickstarter, I'm not saying it was easy. It was an obvious investment, or that it was, obviously going to work. But I will say that it was obvious that they had thought it through very, very deeply. Right. It was a mission for them. It was not. It was sort of a fun, a new career choice or something done for some kind of more mercenary reason. So I don't know. But the answer, look, is there's no great science to this. People have tried many, many times to use data science and other things to try to quantify these kind of questions you're asking. And the results have been pretty poor. It's been very hard to predict these things. So I don't have.
I was hoping you had the secret recipe for us.
No, I wish I did, and I've certainly tried. Many people have tried. A lot of it's like any kind of creative endeavor. How do you pick a musician early on? How do you pick a writer early on? There's certainly having spent years practicing in the field is very helpful, but ultimately a lot of it comes down to kind of an art, I guess.
So many things do. So switching gears just a little bit here. What's one thing that you think the future holds that no one is talking about?
Good question. I don't know about no one, because I think,
or very few people. Then,
I mean, maybe I could change the question
Sure.
slightly and just say that some of the things I'm excited about. I mean, I think some of the investments I've made have been things that are somewhat unpopular. So, for example, not unpopular, but I would say, I don't know what controversial, or I don't know. So I'm an investor in a company called Coinbase, which is a leading Bitcoin company. So I'm
Right.
very excited. Bitcoin is an example, which I think is somewhat
so
controversial.
digital currencies.
Digital currencies. I was an investor in Oculus, which Facebook, which is a
Yeah.
virtual reality company that Facebook acquired. I'm very, very excited about virtual reality.
How do you think that's going to change our lives, virtual reality?
So I think it's the next day. I think it will be, like, when we look back on the history of computing, it will be the key milestones will be, I mean, I'm at the extreme end of excitement here, but there'll be, the PC, the Macintosh or something like this, then the internet was the next key moment, and then the mobile phone, like the iPhone, and then I think virtual reality will be the next wave.
What about artificial intelligence?
No, that's another interesting one, and that's sort of separate but related.
Okay.
I'm happy to talk about that too. I think virtual reality, though, will. I mean, I don't know how long it will take. Oculus is going to it's announced they're going to release their consumer product in the beginning of next year, and I think initially for the first year or two, it'll be primarily used by people playing video games.
Right.
But I think in the next few years after that, it will be used much more broadly. I think it will be the predominant way that people at some point interact with computers and other people at long distances. I think, in 10 years, we'd be probably having this conversation in virtual reality, and we'd be, looking at each other across the room, and it would feel like we're in the same room. I think it's going to have, the implications are far beyond gaming, and it'll be all kinds of, I think movies. There's lots of interesting health-related applications, communication, social things.
Do you think that'll bring the world closer together?
I do. I think it will. I think it will. There's some great videos on YouTube. I'd encourage people to go on there and check them out. If you just search YouTube for Oculus or for
Right.
virtual reality, you'll see a lot of them. Where there's one the other day where it was a guy who was using virtual reality, a demo to experience. I think it was like the Apollo moon landing or something, and you watch these videos and people are literally crying at the end of it. I mean, I've never seen a computing medium that has such a strong emotional impact, because, in that case, it was a guy who had dreamed his whole life about seeing this, and he was crying, and he was like, I would never be able to see this in any other way. And, I think what it does is it lets people, I think, for example, a big application will be virtual tourism. So just going and simply, visiting the Great Wall of China and the Taj
Right.
Mahal, and all these other kinds of things, and things which right now are very expensive. And one of my favorite demos, I say demo now because it's all very early and it's not like they're not full products, but is a thing called Ocean Rift, which is just lets you just like scuba dive around the ocean and observe different aquatic the sharks and underwater.
It's almost like having the experience but not going, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it'll be all sorts of things like that. I think actually the gaming side is probably in some ways overblown because
Right. But we underestimate everything else, you think?
I think so. So that's VR. So I'm very excited about that. AI, you want me to talk about AI or?
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that. The singularity. Let's talk about this whole
So, okay. There's a lot to say about AI. So I think that, I think there's two things. When people talk about AI, they often are really kind of talking about multiple things, right? So there's AI, there's sort of like the how, singularity, like when will we have a talking computer? And then there's automation and will computers take jobs away and things like this. So I think a lot of people have what I would call kind of a World's Fair view of technology. So you remember the World's Fair, and I don't know if you see it's the Captain America movie or a bunch of other movies where they show, it was like Howard Hughes type guys, and they're showing, the Tesla coils and the Android robots and the flying cars. And so a lot of people, sort of a simplified way to think of technology is like the robots are coming and people are going to build robots that take away our jobs. If you actually look at how automation works, it's actually, I think, a lot more nuanced and less obvious. So I'll give you an example. Like you just take almost any technology company that's on our website that we've invested in. I'll just pick an arbitrary example. A company called Zenefits. So Zenefits is a web product that lets you, if you're a small business, go and sign up new employees for healthcare and other benefits, right?
Right.
So it sounds like just like, it's whatever. It's a benefit software, right? Actually, what it ends up doing is it ends up letting you hire fewer people at your company because you now no longer have to hire, somebody to do that job, right? So what I would argue is things like a lot of automation doesn't really look like automation. It looks like just regular software.
Right.
That's a lot of ways what AI really is sort of taking what smart people do and embedding it in software and giving that software out to lots of people. And so every new piece of software that you see in some ways is sort of a piecemeal form of AI. And then when you combine it all together, what you get is kind of this broader kind of functioning super system of all the software interacting together. I think a lot of the real AI, the real automation ends up sneaking up on you. Now, there's this other kind of AI, which is the kind of more spectacular stuff that you read about, which is
stuff that gets the headlines.
Yeah, so Siri is an example, which is speech recognition, and then Google's doing a lot of interesting stuff with image recognition. I do think this stuff is at a lot of people in Silicon Valley believe that this kind of AI is at a inflection point now, and specifically around a technology called deep learning, which is basically I don't know if you remember neural networks. So neural networks of the trendy, there were a lot of books written about them and things in like the 90s, which were basically computer systems that were kind of designed to replicate the way that the human brain works. Yeah. And it was sort of held out as its promise, and then it was sort of, there was a letdown afterwards because it didn't kind of deliver the results people wanted. But basically what we've now discovered is it turns out that if you do neural networks and you use a lot more computing power, which we now have available because of Moore's law, which is, the idea that basically all computing gets faster and cheaper very quickly over time. Basically, if you take neural networks and you make them a lot more computing power, a lot more storage, a lot more memory, a lot more networking, a lot more computing resources, it works really well. That's what, a couple of years ago, Google did a very famous experiment where they basically took, I think it was on the order of tens of thousands of computers, had them study YouTube videos, and at the end of it, those computers were able to correctly identify cats, like whether it contained a cat, with a very high degree of accuracy. That was one of the kind of results they released that really kind of shocked people as to how accurate it was. Because basically a lot of this stuff in AI, I mean, if you use Siri as an example, a lot of it is sort of relatively easy to get to like 80-90% accuracy. It turns out if you just like a regular programmer downloads a bunch of open source software and spends a weekend, you can make like a decent replica of Siri in like a weekend.
Oh wow, okay.
But you
to
get
it higher accuracy beyond that is like exponential.
80-ish% really quickly. And then it turns out all of the work is in the last 20%. So like self-driving cars are another good example where if somebody tells you, I saw a self-driving car and it was able to drive on the highway during daylight, that's actually not very impressive. And that's actually something that almost anyone can build. I mean, anyone with a programming ability can build. What's hard is all of the millions of edge cases. So by edge cases, I mean, it's dark, it's raining, a dog jumps out, two dogs jump out, a shadow that looks like a dog jumps out, like, whatever, like there's you name it. There's a million little special cases where to learn all those different special cases takes lots and lots of additional effort. And so the kind of the big breakthrough with the cat video in Google was that they'd gotten kind of to this point of like 99% or something like that, which no one had ever gotten to before. It might have been 97. I forgot the exact number, but it was a very high number. And then they've since gone on to do more experiments where they've done things that do like what they call image classification, which is basically take an image and describe what's in the scene. And the results are getting very, very good there. So, you'll take an image and the computer will say, this is, 3 children eating pizza, and it's right, and like things like that. And so there've been a lot of really promising results, and it's still very early. I mean, look at your phone and the autocorrect, and every day you'll see it make like ridiculous mistakes.
I hate autocorrect.
Right? I mean, like, so, and we can't make an autocorrect today that seems to work, even most of the time.
Doesn't even get the swear words right. Like,
no. so I still think we have a long way to go. I think the sort of I would call the laboratory results are very promising. But
Right.
those laboratory results require like 10,000 computers.
Right. Yeah. It's unfeasible right now to have that. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. So one of the questions will be just kind of how long does it take for that kind of computing power for the price to drop and
right.
become more ubiquitous. And, there's Moore's law. There's all sorts of questions around Moore's law. Some people think Moore's law is slowing down. I think one of the big potential interesting things here is what's called quantum computing, which is, is this whole new kind of theoretical area of basically how to build computers that use quantum effects. So things from quantum mechanics. I would say the optimistic people, and, including some very well-respected, computer science professors at Stanford, for example, believe that in 5 to 10 years, we'll have quantum computing in the mainstream. If that happens, you could see a dramatic
AI will take off.
It could lead to a dramatic acceleration in the performance of AI. Yeah, there's a bunch of things. One of the reasons it's very hard to predict these technology things is that you often have these things that have kind of feedback loops.
Right.
Which means, like, if we get quantum computing, and if we, and if we get, that will let us compute things faster, which will let us store more, and then we'll be able to store more data,
and that'll have all sorts of second and third order effects on.
Yes, exactly.
Everything
that's very
possible.
Complex kind of feedback loop systems, and so if I had to bet, I think we're still pretty far away from kind of the singularity, but there are certain scenarios people can
conceive of that
it's much sooner.
So with all these different companies, like, how do you filter information, and how do you do that personally? Like, how do you know what's important and what's not important? Like, how do you determine signal from noise when you're, surfing the internet?
That's a great question. I'm a huge fan of, Twitter, for example. I use Twitter constantly, and for me, it's probably one of my most important work tools, in that I've have a carefully curated list of people I follow who, essentially, I have whatever it is, 2,000 of the smartest people in the world finding information for me and telling me what to read. That's how I view Twitter. So that's obviously very important. At the firm, we have a whole bunch of different things we do, including, lots of people that we interact with and that we talk to regularly. We try to do things like, for example, we have a big academic conference coming up in a few weeks where we invite 50 plus of the top computer scientists in the world to come and kind of do like a mini, almost like TED Talks or something at our firm. We do lots of outreach with academia and things. We try to get involved also in like the open source communities, go to lots of events, do lots of press outreach. A lot of what we try and do is just kind of be in the flow of a lot of different, interesting groups of people working on new things.
Right. So what do you think people are focused on that's a waste of time? Like, what do you think misplaced attention? Where would that lie?
Good question. So in the tech world specifically, or?
Yeah, or in general, I mean, like, other than Donald Trump.
I think that, I'll give you one example of the food industry.
Right.
So I'm an investor in a company called Soylent, which you may have heard of, which is kind of
I've tried their stuff.
Okay, so I think with Soylent, I mean, the idea with Soylent is that we're trying to create kind of what we would consider a scientifically perfect food. Kind of the idea is you go and the guys, have a team of scientists who went and read every scientific paper about nutrition and then designed and built this perfect food. I think when you look at the food industry, there's an interesting movement. Soylent's one example. There's a bunch of other Silicon Valley startups that are trying to do new things around food. I think that's an industry which is it's just a very backwards industry today. If you look at the U.S. right now, the diabetes and obesity are really at the epidemic level, and a lot of that's caused by excessive sugar and other kinds of ingredients like that. And if you just go, I was just down just now this morning trying to find something healthy to eat at the local store, and everything is just filled with
junk, sugar,
junk
salt,
and sugar, and all sorts of other things. And it's really just an industry built around advertising and marketing and distribution, and almost no money is put into actually researching healthier and better foods. So that's something I'm very passionate about. I think we like to say sugar is the new smoking. So we think that when you look back 20 years from now, people will just be stunned by the kind of foods that we ate today. I think the whole organic food movement's a great thing. I think that's mostly only accessible to wealthier people. So I think a lot of, what I think is interesting are the people that are trying to think more broadly about how to reform the industry, not just for people that can afford organic food.
Yeah. A lot of my friends would call that, the luxury of the rich, right?
Yeah, exactly. So like, just what can we do more broadly? So that's an interesting one. I'm very interested also in healthcare generally. We're doing spending a lot more time making investments in sort of areas that intersect between healthcare and computer science, and just think there's a lot of things there that, if you just look at the statistics of why are healthcare costs going up so dramatically, a lot of it has to do with the inefficiencies in the system. Everything from medical records are still kept on paper. The insurance system is very complex and in many ways backwards. It's
the incentives seem all over the place too.
The incentives are all over the place. It costs more and more now people debate the exact reason, but basically it costs more and more to create new drugs.
Right.
So there's all sorts of interesting things there. I think they can be improved.
Listen, I'm totally conscious of your time here. We're nearing the end. I have 3 questions that I always ask everybody.
Yeah, great.
So what's the one book you've read that had the greatest influence on your life?
Oh man, I think I think when I was in high school, I read Gödel, Escher, Bach. Douglas Hofstadter's book. I don't know if you know that book.
I'm going to look it up now, though.
So I was interested in computers since I was a kid, and this book was sort of it tied together computers and philosophy and music, and for me it was really important because it really broadened my horizons. And I ended up majoring. In college, I majored in philosophy. And I think that book kind of got me to do that. That would be a huge one for me. Also, anything by Daniel Dennett. You read Daniel Dennett?
Yeah.
Like Consciousness Explained.
I love this stuff. Yeah.
That kind of, there's this whole kind of thread of, I think, Oliver Sacks, who sadly just passed away, and Stephen Gould. I used to just read all of those kind of popular.
No wonder you're so smart.
I don't know. Those were great teachers. So when I was a kid, whatever, high school, college, I read all those books, and those were all just sort of hugely influential on me.
So what's on your nightstand right now? What are you reading right now that you're really into?
I just read, what's it called? The 3-Body Problem. I just finished it. You've read this book?
No.
It's this Chinese author who just it's a science fiction book. It just won the Hugo Award or something. It was a really interesting book. What else did I read? I just bought this, what's it called? The Martian, which is, I guess, this popular book that's now made into a movie. And books are one thing I like to. I'm not digital on books. I buy only.
Oh, you're still physical. Why is that?
I just really like physical books. I like having them on my shelf. I like the feeling of reading a book. I don't know. It's something where
I'm the same way. I live in this like weird world where, I read physical books and then go out and buy a Kindle copy. Just because I can't keep every physical book, right? Like
That's true. That's a problem. I just like the feeling of them. And I feel like I look at the screen too much as it is. And it's distracting too, to have like the thing, I don't know, I read on the iPhone, and then I can like check Twitter, and it's like, it's too distracting. Oh, I just read the Elon Musk book, which I thought was good. Sort of the biography of Elon Musk.
Right.
I read a really good book called Sapiens. Have you heard of this?
Oh, I heard of that book. Yeah. Somebody else recommended that to me.
It's it's kind of like Guns, Germs, and Steel. Like one of these, I think they're calling the genre Big History, where it's kind of the panoramic view of history, and it's just the history of Homo sapiens.
I've heard that was amazing.
Yeah, it was really awesome. I highly recommend it.
And so what I'm trying to do with the Knowledge Project. Who would you like to see on the show?
Out of anybody, or
out of anybody in the world.
Can you narrow it down a little, or
no? Like who would you like to hear me interview? I guess.
That's a good question.
I'm gonna call them and tell them you recommend that they come on.
Okay. It would be good. Who'd be great is do you know Venkat from Ribbon Farm?
I do. Yes.
He's one of my favorite writers.
He's already agreed to come on.
Oh wow! Okay, well there you go. So I have too much overlap.
That's awesome. It's a good choice.
Who's incredibly brilliant is Ben Thompson. He has this thing. It's called Stratechery. Do you know
him? Definitely. I just started following him on Twitter.
Yeah, he's awesome.
Well, thanks so much, Chris. This has been great fun. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, well, my pleasure, and thanks for having me.
Hey guys, this is Shane again. Just a few more things before we wrap up. You can find show notes at farnamstreetblog.com/podcast. That's FarnamStreetblog.com/podcast. You can also find information there on how to get a transcript. And if you'd like to receive a weekly email from me filled with all sorts of brain food, go to farnamstreetblog.com/newsletter. This is all the good stuff I've found on the web that week that I've read and shared with close friends, books I'm reading, and so much more. Thank you for listening.